going on, guys? XSR Detroit with another install video for you. Today we are looking at the Apollo heated grips from Koso. So the way I look at this, we have two ways we can install it. The first way is the easy way. We could take the wiring harness, run it straight to the battery, and you're good to go. Now the negative aspect of this is if you turn the bike off but leave your heated grips on, you could potentially kill your battery. So we're gonna do it, I don't call it the hard way, it's just the worth the effort way. We're gonna tap into the bike's existing accessory power. That way when you turn the bike off, it's gonna turn your heated grips off, which I think is completely worth it. So let's grab some tools and get to work. First step, we're gonna get this seat off. Next step, we're going to be removing the tank trim and the tank panels. Next up, we have 6 4mm Allen fasteners to pull. At the front and back of the tank, we have 4 total push pins to remove. Go ahead and pop off your tank panels. On the brake lever side of the bike, we have these 2 fasteners. You can remove those with a standard 6-point 12mm socket. Next up, we have these 2 4mm Allen fasteners that we need to take out. With all 4 fasteners removed, we are good to pull this cover. Behind it, you're going to see this rubber portion, and inside here we have the accessory plug, which we'll get to a bit later. Next step, we're going to move up to the handlebars and get these bar ends off. Over here on the clutch side of the bike, I started out with a small, thin pick, inserted it into the grip. Now when you start out, there's not going to be a lot of room to work in here, so you're going to have to kind of work on it. With the pick inserted, I have enough space to fit a little can of degreaser, spray that, and slowly I've been working around the inside here. So it's a process. This is going to break up the adhesive that's holding the stock grips onto the bar. Eventually I got to the point where I could use a flat blade screwdriver, which gave me a little bit more leverage. After doing this for a while, I'm starting to feel it loosen up. Kind of see it. So I'm just going to keep doing this until we get it off. I had a feeling getting the grips off was going to be the most annoying part. After removing the screwdriver and pick around the inside of the grip and spraying and twisting, it's finally ready to twist off. Of course, over on the brake side we have our throttle. Inside the throttle is our throttle tube, so just make sure you're delicate, take care, don't pry on anything when you have the pick on here. Just take it slow, do the same thing you did on the left side, you know, use the pick, spray, and it'll come off eventually. There seemed to be a lot less adhesive on the side, so it actually wasn't that bad, but I was also being careful with it, but that came off. Make sure you wipe down your throttle tube before you move on. Now we're back down here on the brake side of the bike. We have this cover for the auxiliary power, so we're just gonna pop that off. And if you notice, I marked it white with the paint pen over here because that is our hot wire. The other side is our ground. I wanted to make sure I marked it just so when I plug all this stuff in, I don't make a mistake and have to depin these connectors. So let's move over to the workbench and take a look at the wiring. Here we have the stock auxiliary power connector, and I ordered a kit that had additional ones, but it turns out they're not correct. You see, this has the indent, this has the space for the indent, so this can't do shit with that. But it did come with the pins and the grommets that we're going to need to insert the wiring into this connector and plug it in as if it was a stock or factory option. So it's not entirely useless, but I will have to crimp all this together to put it in the connector. I'm going to start out by placing the grommets on the wiring. Pop that through for the hot side. Then throw on the grommet for the ground. And work those down. Now I'm going to strip the necessary amount of wire to fit our pin. One thing I forgot to mention earlier is when you remove this connector, it's going to have little insert covers inside of it. I just remove them with a pick. I use my wire cutters to crimp the connector on. Alright, so not my best crimping job I've ever done, but it's going to do the job, so we're ready to insert our wiring into our connector. Now that I have my wiring plugged into the connector, I'm just going to take these grommets and work them down to the connector. Alright, we are ready to go onto the bike. Back on the right side of the bike, I've got the cover off and the fuse box open, and what we're going to do is we're going to take this 2-amp fuse here. This is the fuse for the accessory electronics, and remove that because we're going to put in a 5-amp fuse. Just like that. And I'm actually going to take this 2-amp out too and swap that. These are spares, but it's not going to do me any good if I blow a fuse and I don't have the correct size, right? There we go. Before we move any farther, I decided to plug the harness into the bike so we can test the grips and make sure that they're functioning before we move on. Alright, we got power. Let's move on. Included in the kit is some super glue, so let's pop that. There we go. And I think I'm going to go get some gloves because I always get super glue. I already got super glue on my finger. So this happens every time. I'm going to start with the clutch side of the motorcycle. Basically what I'm going to do is put the glue on top and get the grip on there as fast as possible. While the glue is wet, it's going to act as a lubricant to make it easier to slide on, but it's going to dry pretty quick, so don't waste any time. Like, get that grip on there as soon as possible. And what I want to do is, we have the power button here. I want to line that up with my turn signals. I think that would be a good spot. That was cool. I got glue on my glove, so I had to fling that off real quick, but went on good. It's exactly where I want it. Let's move on to the next side. Over here on the throttle side, it's going to be a little bit different. So we have this wire coming down from the grip itself, and what you want to do is make sure it's facing down this way in between your brake lever and the throttle itself. I wanted to mock it up, but it goes on pretty tight, so we're just going to have to nail this in the first shot. I will say, you have a bit more time than I thought as far as the glue, but I mean, make sure, you know, put the glue down, get this on. So what I'm going to try to do is get the glue on and maybe hold it from the bottom and just kind of work it on, and that from there I can make adjustments to make sure the wiring is in a spot that I like. Alright, sweet. I'm pretty happy with that. If the glue does dry fast on you, you can always just use a blow dryer on the grips to kind of loosen them up and kind of start over. Luckily I didn't have to do that, but I figured I'd let you guys know if you run into that situation. But now that we have the grips on, we can start looking at the wiring. As far as the fuse box goes over here, we're pretty much all done, so I'm going to kind of wrap this up, get this area tidied up, ready to be put back onto the bike. We're not going to put it on the bike now, but after this we're going to take a look at the main harness and see how much space we have to work with as far as the wiring. Remember, we have this we have the wiring here for the grips, but we need to leave enough slack so we can turn the handlebars left to right and, you know, make sure we're not getting caught up. So we'll put this back together and take a swing at the main harness. It's good to go. I'm gonna disconnect this harness and start working this thing in. Alright, so I tried snaking the wiring harness in without taking off the gas tank and maybe even the airbox, and it's just not working out. So I am going to pull the gas tank, and I'm probably going to take the airbox off too. So let's get that off. So first step, you've got a fuel line and an electrical connector down here. So let's disconnect those first. Next step, we have a 12mm fastener back here and a 4mm Allen head on each side. Last step is two breather lines that are a little easier to get at when the tank is lifted off. With the gas tank removed, it was a lot easier to pull the wiring harness for the heated grips through the frame. Basically what I did is I unplugged my ECU and pulled the wiring harness back so I could work the wiring harness for the heated grips behind this. And the reason I did that is because now the wiring harness for the ECU will hold this wiring harness up. I was having an issue where the wiring harness was touching the engine, and I didn't want to do that. So this way I don't have to worry about the wiring harness for the heated grips to be touching the engine. Any way that you decide you want to run your wiring, just make sure it's not touching anything hot or it could get damaged, because then you'll have to pull everything apart again and it's a total pain in the ass. So what I'm going to do now is, now that I had that wiring worked under and behind the ECU harnesses, I'm just going to plug that back in. And we're going to move on. So what I've done is I took the wiring for the throttle side and the control side of the grips and worked them down in front of the airbox over here. Now we have the connector for our heated grips with the inline fuse. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to work this back into the frame. Then I'm also going to pull in the slack for the main connector to the accessory power, and everything should fit nicely. For now, I'm not going to worry about the slack of the handlebar grips. We're going to address that a little bit later. Connect those. Make sure your wires aren't getting tangled. Check your engine for clearance. We're good. Start pulling the main power through. Alright, go ahead and pick up your cover for the back of this fuse box cover. Work that in there. Alright, so now that I got this all packed up, I'm just gonna place these nuts on here. I'm not gonna tighten everything up quite yet. I wanna make sure that the grips are working great before I start securing everything. Wiring looks good, everything looks where it's supposed to be. So let's get that gas tank back on. Over here I have my slack wiring for the grips. I'm just gonna tuck that down there for now. So what I like to do when I put my gas tank on is grab the 12mm back fastener, and when you place the tank on, just go ahead and run that through and give it a couple threads. That way you can actually lift the tank to work on it, but you also don't have to worry about it toppling over. On the left side of the gas tank, we have two breather tubes. On the right side, we have an electrical connector and a fuel line. Personally, I like to start on the left side. Now that my tank's hooked up, I'm ready to tighten up the 12mm back here and the two 4mm Allen heads up front. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn the bike on and test out the heated grips to make sure everything's working fine before we start to wrap everything up. I turned the grips to the highest setting and let the bike run for a little bit, and both grips are nice and toasty right now, so everything's working as it should, so we're ready to wrap this bike up. Real quick, I want to talk to you guys about wiring slack when it comes to heated grips. You want to make sure that you have enough slack that you can turn the bike left to right, and you don't have stuff rubbing, you don't have wiring rubbing. You want to make sure you have an adequate amount of this wiring slack, and I think now is a good time to kind of take a look at that and, you know, turn your bike, see how you feel about it. But this is a step you really don't want to skip. You don't want to find out after you wrapped everything up that you didn't give yourself enough slack to turn the bike. Back on the right side of the bike, I'm going to start wrapping up the fuse box cover. Next up, let's add some tank panels. We've got our two push pins in the back and our two push pins in the front. Fuck. We've got our push pins in the front and in the back of the tank trim. We've got 6 fasteners on top of the gas tank. Grab your seat. Gonna put some finishing touches on the bike. I'm going to cut this zip tie right here and add another one so I can bring this up a little bit, get it out of the way. Again, I'm gonna make sure that I turn the handlebars to make sure I have enough slack on both sides, and I'll probably put this up here. And this is also a good opportunity, since the bike's completely back together for the most part, to make sure you check. Turn the handlebar left, right, make sure nothing's rubbing, make sure it's not getting caught, everything. Just make sure that it's 100%. I'm not going to tighten this up too tight. I still want some mobility just in case, but that should do the job just fine. Pop your bar ends back into both sides. On the clutch side of the bike, I was able to put my bar end in no problem. this lip fit over it just fine. But on the throttle side, I noticed when I was hand tightening my bar end that throttle was starting to stick. So what I think I'm gonna have to do is get a knife or a razor and shave this lip off. So I've trimmed the grip down. I don't feel comfortable going any further than this, and unfortunately my bar end still wants to lock up the throttle. So essentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some blue Loctite on the threads of my bar end and just inch it just a little bit far away so I still have full throttle capabilities. So last night I put a bit of blue Loctite on each of the bar ends and snugged them up to where I felt comfortable, where we still have full throttle. And they're on, they're not moving, so let's pop these mirrors on. That's going to do it for this install video, guys. I'm really excited to have these grips on my motorcycle. I actually got them a year ago after a 6-hour, very cold, late season ride. I decided heated grips were a must, and I actually think they're going to extend my riding season quite a bit, which is cool. Big shout out to my buddy Dan for all the tips for installation. Appreciate you, sir. And yeah, if you want to see more Xsr900 content, please subscribe. If you have any questions for me, sound off in the comments section, and if you like the video, throw it a like. But yeah, ride fast, ride naked, wear your helmet, and I will see you in the next video.